Okay, GM everyone, welcome to the June 20th protocol meeting. We have quite a few items on the agenda today from the protocol side that we will talk through. So very high level agenda. We'll talk about longer casts, which is the FIP that Sanjay wrote and shipped last week. We'll talk about storage reduction, which is a proposal to reduce storage units to help hubs, reduce storage amounts to help hubs scale. We have some improvements on Hubble that we want to talk through just to make sure that for hub runners and infra operators that this isn't causing any issues. And then we want to give an update on where we're landing with the investigations around external cast data. Warpcast team has been doing a bunch of prototyping and we have some updates to share. And last up is a quick update on decentralized channels and then some stuff on Warpcast. So let's get started. First up, longer casts. So this is FIP 16. This was released last week. Based on a lot of the work that DF and Vripan did with the external cast data, we found a simple way to ship longer casts in the app. And we've actually managed to release this FIP pretty quickly, both on the Warpcast side and on the hub side. And longer messages of up to 1,000 characters or 1,000 bytes are now supported. Usage has actually been pretty good. We've seen almost 4 to 5% of new casts that have been of the longer cast type, which has been pretty cool to see in feeds. And so generally, this feels like a quick, easy win that's managed to move the needle on Farcaster's content. So shout out to everybody who pushed for this idea and helped get this over the finish line. Dan just posted a Dune query, which can show you the length of casts and how that's changed over time. Any questions on this before we move on to the next item? Okay, next up, a new FIP proposal. This is still very much in draft phase. We've started talking about this yesterday, but want to surface it to this group for any initial feedback before we put out the actual doc. Hubs today are about 130 gigs, so they've grown substantially larger over the last 6 months as we've had a lot more users. And our projection is that they'll get to about 0.5 terabyte or 500 gigs in about 6 to 12 months. This obviously gets more and more expensive for hub operators to operate and just more challenging from an infrastructure perspective. So one of the things we want to do is alleviate that load. We spent a bunch of time looking into optimizations on the index and storage side of things, and we've gotten most free wins out of the way. There's probably a couple more things that might, like we could optimize the way things are stored on disk that might save 1% or 2% of space, but nothing that would actually cause us to save, 5, 10, or 20% of space. So the other option we have is to actually increase the inbound load. And there's 2 ways to do this. You can either make storage units more expensive, which makes it likely that fewer people are renting storage units, so that reduces growth, or you can reduce the amount each storage unit offers, which in turn reduces the amount of space on disk. Here's how we think about the trade-offs between those 2 options. Increasing the storage unit cost, i.e. increasing the sign-up cost and the renewal cost, will have an impact on inbound users. And if you actually split users into 2 categories, people who are genuine, interesting users and people who are trying to farm airdrops, genuine users tend to be somewhat price sensitive. Airdrop farmers tend to not be price sensitive. And so the impact of bumping up the price from $3 to $5 to $10, airdrop farmers are here because they're looking for a drop of $100. And so the additional dollar change is not going to discourage them, but might actually discourage legitimate users. And so our proposal is to actually reduce the amount of storage in each unit and bring that down by about 20%. So if you have 5,000 casts today, it's actually 4,000 casts. If you have 2,500 reactions, it's 2,000 reactions and so on. So we're doing some math on how much this actually helps save. But the general idea is for most users, this effect will be largely unnoticed. Some of your oldest casts, oldest reactions, oldest messages will be pruned, but they don't affect anything about the feed. They don't affect anything about the app experience. And for people that actually do want that larger storage, they can go buy more storage units and extend it. So we've decided, so the decision that we have on this FIP is to try and reduce storage, and we're doing the math to see if it will actually save a substantial amount of space. And Ozymandias is driving this, and we'll post an FIP later today with the outline. And if it looks good, we will do this in the next major release, which will be about 5 weeks from now. Let me pause there and see if folks have any questions.
How is the FIP 16 related to storage usage?
It's not. Sorry, we're on the second topic, which is storage reduction.
Yeah, I know, but if that's inserted, will it take up a lot more storage?
So let me talk about how we're thinking about storage for FIP16. So we've now allowed longer casts, and so the casts are actually going to take up more bytes on disk.
Right.
Currently, the way we've done it is we've said, hey, all casts can become long casts. So if you're allowed to have 4,000 casts, all 4,000 casts can become long casts. Two observations about this. One is most users do not use anywhere close to the maximum of their cast capacity. They're usually at around 500 to 1,000 casts. Many users are even in the two-digit space. So assuming users are good and casting regular content, the longer casts we think are going to have minimal to negligible impact on storage usage, like less than 1% at most in terms of how much it changes on disk. It is possible that that changes over time, that people just start writing more casts, that certain bot accounts or other accounts start posting longer messages, and storage starts getting more and more storage starts getting consumed. And so one of the things we called out in the FIP16 design is the way longer casts are implemented. We now have the flexibility to apply separate limits on longer casts versus shorter casts. And so we can go in and say, hey, you only get 100 long casts, but you get like 4,000 short casts, and that actually helps us like add more constraints. So we have the ability to do that, but given that that impact is negligible, we're not going to do that today.
Okay, cool.
Is 500 GB actually a limitation on hub owners? That's a very good question. And no, it's not an upper bound. And you're totally right that storage is very inexpensive, and we could go higher on this amount. The real ceiling right now is probably around 7 terabytes. And the reason that's the ceiling is most hubs perform best when you're on like these high performance NVMe drives, and they performance start to degrade when you go to plain SSD or like network attached storage. We're quite a ways away from that limit. However, we want to start trying some of these storage constraint things to get ahead of the problem. I think reducing the storage unit cost is the first experiment to see what the impact of this will be, how the community reacts to it, how apps are affected, et cetera, et cetera. And it will help delay that move to 500 gigs and make it easier for us to scale the network. Is each hub owner expected to handle 130 gigs? So the way hubs work today is each hub is entire global state. So there is no you're hosting part of the network, you're hosting part of the network. What actually makes hubs easy to use is you can query for any user's data if you're running a hub. And so 130 gigs is the entire state of all the casts on Farcaster and everything that's within the storage bounds. Okay, last call for questions before we move on to talking about Hubble updates. Going once, going twice. Okay, the FIP will be out and y'all can comment on it if you have additional thoughts. Would appreciate everyone's input, particularly people who are running hubs and have thoughts on storage costs. Okay, so Hubble, 2 updates. Cassie has been working on link defragmentation. So this is an FIP we surfaced a couple months ago, and Warpcast has been slowly productionizing it, where we started rolling it out for a small handful of users and then a larger handful of users. And what link defragmentation does, as a quick recap, previously when you run out of follows and you have a bunch of dead follows, which are removes that are taking up space, it was a very noisy, thrashy process at the hub level to try and compact them so that you could actually like remove all these dead follows. Link defragmentation sort of is an elegant single message that allows you to create that compaction and get rid of all that dead space efficiently. So for people who are bumping up against their follow limits, this allows you to use that space more efficiently. So it's rolled out. We expect this to be a completely backwards compatible change, meaning only applications that want to implement defragmentation need to do it, but everybody reading link data, like all the hub operators, should see no material difference because all the events and all the data points are the same. They're just some new endpoints that let you fetch these defragmented objects. So we rolled it out to most users. So if anybody is seeing any funkiness, any issues with follows or things like that, please let us know. Cassie is going to be on point to debug and fix any of these issues. Cool. Second item on Hubble, the number of nodes, i.e. hubs, running in the network is crossed 4,000, which is actually a pretty crazy number of nodes to be running and operating. And our initial sort of probing of the network shows that most of them are returning legitimate messages and for the most part look like legitimate hubs. So it doesn't appear on the surface level that there's any sort of spamming or farming going on with running hubs, at least that we've been able to discover so far. What we're focused on now is as the number of hubs grow, sync becomes more and more complicated. And while we have not seen any issues yet, we want to get ahead of it and start measuring and improving sync. So a lot of the work the team is doing this week is about instrumenting sync quality, trying to understand if hubs are falling behind, and introducing some sort of a high-level scoring mechanism for hubs so that we can find the hubs that are not performing well and either make it obvious to them that their hubs are not syncing, or if they continue to be non-performant, actually remove them from the network so that they're not slowing down sync and impeding the overall network. So phase one is just going to be better sync metrics, which we will develop internally and then make public. And then phase two will be actually implementing some kind of scoring based on that, which allows us to trim out non-performant hubs, which will contribute to the network being slow. Cool. Any questions on any of that? Sweet. Next topic is external cast data. So I'll try to recap where we left off the last protocol meeting. We had this proposal for external cast data. It was specifically focused around one use case initially, which was inbound articles. Inline articles, and taking blog posts and things that you write and making them expandable and readable inline. The second problem that was articulated in that post was, hey, can we actually make this more generalized? Rather than just being a form for articles, is this actually useful for attaching other types of data and other types of operations to casts? And so one of the things that Horsefax and Tony have been exploring this week is a few different types that might make sense to bring into this initial spec and see if we can design something around it. So the three things that they're exploring, one is articles, which we talked about. So bring in a blog post and paragraph and make read inline super nice and easy. Second is polls, which is, can we make polls, which, Ponder has a great in cast poll experience, but can we make it easier to compose them, see the results, get it feeling closer to Twitter level of interactivity by building some custom components around that? And then the third is payments. Can we make it easier to do the simple payment flow? Like Payflow has done a great job of making that easy, but can we make it super easy to initiate, request, and start all of those things within an app without having to invoke or post commands to a frame? So we're working on some prototypes and design. Hopefully we'll share an updated proposal that incorporates all of this either this week or early next week, and we can then have another discussion. If you're interested in commenting on this, I will try to post it out on FC updates. We'd love to get your feedback async because we want to make a lot of progress before the next one of these meetings and actually have a design, or at least perhaps even a rough implementation that we can be looking at. Okay, let me see if there's any questions in chat. There's one on the previous topic, which I'll go back to in a second. But in the meantime, any questions on the external cast data update? Nope. Okay. Any plans to incentivize running a hub beyond having a locally available DA? We have the opposite problem right now. We want to disincentivize running hubs that are non-performant. And I mean, jokes aside, this might actually be a situation where if the number of hubs keeps increasing exponentially with no end in sight, it may actually cost or require staking or the opposite to run a hub to guarantee service, which says, hey, this is a hub. I promise I'm operating this well. And I will sync with other hubs that are also staking some small amount. So we might find ourselves with the opposite problem of what we're seeing here. Cool. By the way, this was a meme in early Farcaster days when we first announced hubs, which is why will anyone ever run a hub? And we have consistently for the last 2 years have had the exact opposite problem, for reasons I don't fully understand. But for better or for worse, that's the thing that we're running into. Yeah, airdrop hunters is a totally reasonable hypothesis. It is just surprising that a hub that costs quite a significant chunk of change, $20 a month at least, is being run consistently month after month, year after year by airdrop hunters at the scale of thousands. By the way, if anyone has an ability or thesis or can prove that some of these hubs are either not operating correctly or fake or anything, we would love to see that. We've tried to do it and we haven't been able to prove it yet. Yeah, David, we probed this. Arguably, we haven't done the full dig into figuring out everything. So if you can find it, I mean, maybe I should just put a bounty on this. But if you can prove that some set of these hubs are fake and reliably identify that, we'd love to know. Was there a spec or timeline for polls? So spec hopefully this week or early next week, and then timeline TBD based on feedback on that. But we would like to move as quickly as possible and get something out there. If you're interested in building or using that, let us know. We're already talking to Ponder, obviously, because they've built frames, they built polls. But if anyone else is interested in that, using that spec or implementing it, let us know. Cool. Decentralized channels. Dan, do you want to give the quick update on the narrowcast experiment?
Yeah, so I've been spending some time with a couple folks on the team, really focusing on trying to increase the number of what I would call quality casts on the network. I think if we step back, fundamentally Farcaster as a network is limited on the supply of quality content. And the way to think of quality content is one, it's highly subjective, but if Farcaster is going to be upstream of something like Twitter in any particular category, we have to have like artifacts that are kind of setting the conversation. And so we've done a bunch of different experiments around trying to increase the amount of casting from what is a concentrated group of a lot of whom are OGs, but some newer people, of people who actually post quality, interesting content that is, for the most part, textual, right? So visual content, fine, but like that's easy to cross-post both places. When you actually post a cast that is a lot of text that generates other discussion, that discussion itself is the artifact that is interesting. And so two general areas. One, long casts contributes to this. Would love to see more people using long casts on topics they're interested in. And then in talking to people who I would say are like considered, I would think, good casters, a lot of people weren't posting in channels, at least stated, because they felt like they would annoy their audience. So an example of this, Linda was the one that kind of crystallized this in a piece of feedback. She's interested in bird watching. She's got a huge audience of Farcaster. She just want to post about birds. I don't care about that personally when I do it, but I'm a different set of incentives. And so I think narrowcasting is an experiment. Right now, it's around 4% of casts from that kind of like concentrated group of people are narrowcasts, which I view as basically, you could say a narrowcast is probably a cast that didn't exist before. So that's an increase to the supply of content. We're going to let it run for another week or so and then make a call, but it's trending positive, and it's a relatively straightforward thing to add to the protocol so that it'll actually be decentralized pretty quickly before channels. Stepping back, there are a few more issues, I think, with channels that we need to kind of go back to the drawing board. So the simple design of just, okay, you have one account, the like stream is what's in there. It's simple from a protocol standpoint, but I actually think channel owners are a certain archetype that want more control. So specifically, there is the idea that people want to have the ability to easily hide casts. So that is well, you can unlike it, but there's just this kind of like getting that UX right, I think, before we go and decentralize the primitive is important. And then I think a second component, which is bubbling up a little bit more, is people really want to be able to control who can reply in a channel, which is not really in the design, nor it ever has been. So I think kind of getting to a place where we have a point of view of maybe doing one more round of changes at the workcast level in a way that is decentralized friendly, feeling like the UX is there, and seeing the increased supply of casts is going to give us confidence that we're headed in the right direction to then actually go do the work of decentralizing channels. The fear we have, and the reason why we haven't pushed decentralizing channels faster coming out of that initial change, is if we go spend a bunch of time decentralizing channels, we are doing nothing to actually increase the total supply of content on the network, which is actually the existential issue for the network and for growth. And if we don't, if we're spending all our time working on the decentralization component, we're not actually making any progress in terms of growth for the network. So I think it's a balancing act. I'd like to see the UX improve, and I'd like to see the supply of casts starting to tick up. And if so, then I think we probably can give ourselves a little bit of space to actually go and do the spec, do the FIP, and then actually make progress on decentralizing channels. Open to feedback based on that point of view. And yeah, Jason, like that as much as I try to tell people, don't worry about it, people have priority mode on, like the recent feed, most people don't click into it. The certain type of person who's running a channel, it's their space, right? They want to feel proud of everything that's in there. And I think not having that control makes it less attractive than if you give full control to the owner and the mod. Samuel, that's a great suggestion. Something that we're thinking about. I mean, one other thing in Warpcast, like those icons at the top, they just don't get a ton of usage relative to the space they take up. So for a lot of people, they tap into maybe one or two, but they don't use the rest. So the whole horizontal scrolling thing's not useful. There's a whole UX component there of Instagram stories, expectation versus reality. But I think we have some ideas on how to improve that. Just trying to balance it relative to the other set of priorities. Because we can be fidgeting around with UI elements all the time versus actually getting to a place where we've increased the amount of new content coming into the network. It feels like it's on a good trend, and we've nailed the remaining UX components of the channel improvement. But I'm optimistic that that should happen over the next few weeks, and we can kind of be in a place where what we said is like we wanted this kind of by early fall, like September is what our kind of target was. And I still think that that's reasonable if we can actually kind of make some progress over the next few weeks.
Cool. Any last questions on this before we move into feed improvements? Then David had a question in chat.
Yeah. I mean, the honest answer is if the user, it's all about usage and UX, right? And so I think like if you have an idea on how to potentially unblock that, great. But I think that there are two ways. One, like detailed mock-ups and suggestions on how to do product input. Fine, we're open to that. I'm not expecting anyone to go do that. But I think other than that, it's on us to figure it out, right? Like I don't have anyone sending me product specs on channel designs. So like I just assume that it's on us to figure out. So that's my general point of view. I'm again open to other implementations and ideas.
The other thing that I would add is I don't think it's bottlenecked on limited resources, because if that was, it would be very easy for us to like take the other half of our team that's working on hub stuff and then just go and like solve it. So it's not a pure throw people at the problem issue. It's a create idea, experiment, test, see feedback, learn and iterate, which is a much more expensive cycle that actually takes many days for changes to roll out and people to iterate on it. So that's kind of the part of the loop that is hardest to compress. So the two ways to make it faster are, one, be extremely correct about the change that you're making. So every change is positive, which is obviously hard. And the second thing is just go as fast as possible and as lean as possible so that you can run through many experiments and actually get to the point where something feels good. That's kind of like the true bottleneck of what's slowing us down.
Yeah, channels is kind of like a product problem. It's like that meme, like, oh, channels like got hands, like, oh shit, channels got hands. Like it's, I think, pretty challenging. It's by far the most challenging product thing I've ever worked on in my entire career. Like, and Varun and I switch off on like who's actually driving some of the thinking on it, because it's actually it's just a lot of complexity to it. But I think there is some path forward where we can crack it, get it into the protocol, and it actually works. But I'm just very hesitant to actually put a version of the protocol that gets enshrined that's actually suboptimal, because then I think it will actually not grow nearly as much. But again, I'm very open to very specific suggestions on how channels should work.
There's another question on an unrelated topic, which is what's the current plan for adding other clients to sign in with Farcaster? I'll let Connor jump in here, but the high level of where we left off is we're very open to it. It's not something we're actively driving. So if someone has a proposal for how they would like to see it implemented, ideally the person building the other client articulating like, hey, this is how I could incorporate into my thing. It could be a rough draft. It could be like a long cast, but some high level idea of how you'd like to do it. And then we're happy to prioritize it.
Cool. So that was me asking the question. Small flex, Supercast supports now signups with embedded wallets. So I'm pretty happy with the state of things on my side. And there's more accounts now that want to connect to other apps using Supercast, or like, doing this on the web where they're logging in with Supercast. So what would you expect what would you expect from me in terms of like writing a spec like that? Like some code implementation, or just like general outline?
I think just take a look at how it works currently, which is we have this proxy server that accepts requests and then forwards it. And then what we would need now is some way to understand which server which app the user wants to forward the request to, what's sort of their base client, and then some way for your client to intercept and fulfill those requests and solve for it. And given that you're using web and you're using Privy, there might be a lot of subtlety in how the signature is actually implemented relative to how we've done it, because we do it on mobile with passkeys, etc. So I think those would be the two major points. How do we route it to you, which is sort of a general routing thing, and then how do you want to do the signatures, and how does that work, which is more specific to maybe your infra.
Okay. Is it possible to do this authentication flow with signers and not with the private keys of custody addresses?
Sorry, so the question is,
Mm.
could we do signer based auth for other signers?
Yeah, so just like, I can authenticate a frame call with an approved signer. Could it potentially work also for signing with Farcaster?
I think so. I'll let Connor weigh in on this one.
I mean, that would be a different standard we'd have to come up with from the start. I generally don't like using signers for identity. Like, I think the identity primitive we have is your custody address, and we should be using that for identity in most places. Like, it's the same thing with frame authentication, because we're overloading that concept of a delegated signer if we start using that for identity. But open to it if we want, and like, potentially maybe we could come up with another signature format or extension to the relay standard. But yeah, I think if
Okay.
this is actively in sight with you for you in the next couple of weeks or something, let's start a chat and working group, and like we can idea.
Yeah, not a priority, but definitely, I need to have some sort of a roadmap to come back to the users with. So awesome. I'll hit you up.
Cool. Unrelated question to the agenda, what's the timeline for enabling EIP 712 signed data for frames? Daniel, I don't think we have an explicit timeline on that particular task, but if you have a use case that you're trying to unlock, we'd love to know. We're basically in like figuring out frames roadmap. So if there's something specific you're trying to ship that would unlock, that would help us bump it higher on the priority stack. I would say it's currently not on any stack. Cool. Is there any use case of an EVM smart contract being able to validate a Farcaster signature from a frame? Is that a question for us, Daniel?
Yeah, or generic. Like, I don't know. I know the signature types are different. So I know that on an L3, I think that there are some precompiles on like the degen chain, but on an L2, I do not know if that is possible. I don't think so. So I was just asking if anyone knew.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head the precompiles that the L2s have, but I guess you'd need a 25 EDDSA verification so you could like check the signature. I think there have been some like gas expensive implementations of this. I've definitely seen those on base, but I don't know if there's any like very cheap or simple implementations. I think Wilson Cusack on Farcaster may have done something in this category a long time ago, back when we were first doing frames. So you might be a good person to ask. Okay, cool. A few more ERC20 permits. Diligent, do you want to elaborate on that question?
Yeah, that's regarding the signing messages in frames. I think that's one of the main use cases for like permit approvals.
I see. Gotcha. Okay, that's helpful. Cool. Any other questions before we move on to feed improvements? I think we've got everything in the chat. Okay. Feed improvements. So a couple updates from last time. We mentioned we were working on a bunch of improvements to the feed. You can think of kind of the feed as this three-layer stack. There's selection, which is what goes into your feed. There's ranking, which is how do we order the stuff that's in your feed and in your universe to show it to you. And then finally, there's ordering, which makes a bunch of changes to how it's actually displayed to solve for things like don't show 5 different casts from Dan back to back if he's been, on a little bit of a bender that day. So those are kind of the 3 levels. I think the changes we made to, excuse me, selection are we've added replies into the feed. So this happens in 2 ways now. One is if you see a reply to a cast from someone you follow, that will get surfaced in your home feed. So you're now able to see conversations a little more clearly. Second, if you see a reply from someone you follow and you don't follow the original author, that will also get pulled into your feed. There's some like minimum engagement threshold to make sure we're not just pulling in like rando replies. but we will actually add interesting conversations in your feed. So increase the universe of, you already follow these people, let's see the conversations that they're having on the broader network, and then they get ranked by the algorithm. We've also like made some incremental improvements to the ML model that has, increased performance a little bit. Nothing material there, but small changes. And then the other change that we rolled out is actually spacing out authors. So we kind of have this thing of like, if multiple posts from the same author show up in your feed, actually space them out a bit, because you do want to see a variety of stuff from different people you follow rather than lots of stuff from the same person you follow. And that actually improved engagement quite a bit. Like more people were liking stuff, more people were coming back to the app. So we rolled out that change, which seems to be positive. So right now you won't see 2 casts from the same author within like 15 casts. Previously it was 10, now it's 15. Third experiment we ran, this one we actually rolled back because it didn't work as well. We tried to add highly engaged content from channels you follow, but from people you don't follow. So you've said, I follow this channel, somebody posts in there, it's high engagement, we pull it in. One of the issues we ran into is there are a lot of channels that people follow that just have stuff that is less interesting to them. And so the average quality was varied. Like some stuff was like super interesting and some stuff was very boring. So we need a better way to rank relevance before we just sort of dump this into your universe. So we rolled back that experiment and we'll try different ways to inject more channel content into your feed. Last update is we've been working on keyword muting. So we might either this week or early next week roll out a version that allows you to specify a keyword and then not have casts with that keyword show up in your feed. So you can eliminate toe spacing if that's what you want to do from your home feed. Cool. I'll pause there and see if there are any questions before we keep going.
Regarding some of the channels, there are some channels who are unmoderated. I thought about some, like, I think the crypto channel itself is unmoderated or like has nothing in their main feed. Is there like, we're just gonna serve a basic feed if there's no moderation setup gonna return, or what's the thinking there?
I'll let Dan take this one.
That's one other component to all this is like, it's the reveal preferences. Most people don't want to do work, but people find those channels potentially useful. I think the default with unmoderated priority mode works well enough for zero work. It's not overwhelmed with spam. Recent is, so maybe we just end up killing that completely. But I think at a high level, we need to basically do more changes at the Warpcast level. So one idea is if you don't moderate a channel and you don't follow it, you don't never see it. So the idea is like only moderated channels get the discovery. So if you don't, then it's just kind of like something that is a legacy thing. But these are all kind of like product nuances we have to go figure out to solve for. Because yanking people's channels is probably not the right way to solve for that.
Yeah, like one of the things I thought about when running a channel, even before I have to like stuff, to make it seeable, is the amount of work it takes to moderate, especially once it becomes successful. Like it's the same with subreddits and Discord groups where they're hiring moderators to do all of that work, and potentially there's some change now with crypto rails to monetize LDR and do rounds or whatever to reward those moderators. But in the end, it's like many people, like you said, will not do that work, and then the automated tooling does not show any costs. So that's the solution where I'm like, okay, if there's a channel owner that has a channel that is somewhat popular, but there's no moderation in there, then it just doesn't show content at the moment. Besides recent, but recent is in those popular channels mostly spam.
Sorry, I was on mute. So just to look, like this is an example, this is a very edge case. The automod is already set up if you go to info and click, but obviously wasn't configured right. So we should do just manually, just got to go clean that up. I think both AirStack and Automod have significantly improved their onboarding flows. So this might just be like an edge case of someone trying to set this up and then actually not following through on it. So we can go specifically clean that up. But I do think that unmoderated channels, priority mode works completely fine. The other thing to remember, and again, this goes back to this idea that like people focused on channels go to channels, like if the ones that they're moderating are the ones they care about. But the vast majority of people never click through to channels and they just consume it in the home feed. Like that's actually a win in the sense that the average person doesn't want to do work. They just want to be entertained. Channel content shows up in the home feeds. They're able to interact with it and reply. So something to solve for, but I do think like, we can get there. I think a broader thing is that we're just subscale for monetization. So we have some experiments like Johnny Nonlinear is doing stuff with Hypersub and people. I know Jason's working on some monetization related stuff that I think he's forthcoming. But the reality is just the audiences are too small. And so I think like the goal is how can we actually make channels really vibrant and get the amount of quality content going in a way that will start to attract people to want to sign up for Farcaster or use a channel specific client because the channel is so good. Yeah.
I had that catch just recently where it was like, okay, people have asked for somewhat of a closer knit, just dev group chat. And I was like, well, okay, there should just be the dev channels. But then there's like, if you really put in the work, the dev channels or whatever, then you can build a client for it and make it developer focused, but putting in the work to just build a channel focused client is probably a couple of weeks of full-time work. And there is no clear path at this point in time besides learning the tech to do that. So yeah, I'm on board with that. I'm not sure if direct casts or whatever being completely programmable will help, because I thought about just co-locating a group chat and a channel so that you have a group chat from a private stuff, but then the other stuff gets into the channel. So you do have a public conversation that increases quality content on the network. But then the direct casts not being fully available made that idea not realizable today. And on the other hand, I quickly chatted with Tony about this, where it's like, oh, if you have to get direct casts completely, also the read permissions, then it needs to be really tight scope, and there's some security considerations for that. So I thought about building these niche clients, but as you said, it's more of a learning the tech and proof of concept than a viable business at this point in time.
Yeah, so I think my sequencing is we have to increase the quality of content on the network. That will drive usage and it'll drive people to come back who both have activated. Like we have a ton of crypto Twitter that have an account, right? Like all your favorites from crypto Twitter, or maybe you don't like crypto Twitter, but like what people actually go to Twitter for, when I ask them, it's like, why do you keep using Twitter? It's like, oh, this is where the conversation is happening. A lot of those people already have a Farcaster account. So the goal is like, how do we get those people over? They're not going to come over to the audience because they already have a bigger audience on X, but they may come over if there's unique and novel content and content that like people are talking about the future of crypto. Like that is the single highest leverage point for us, with the secondary bet on channels. And we kind of outlined this at Farcon, right? It's like growth crypto and then create cozy corners. If we can get channels going on a variety of topics, you may get lucky and have something where it's like, oh, wow, the fitness channel on Farcaster is actually better than the fitness subreddit. And like now people who are interested in fitness want to sign up. And then that potentially creates an opportunity for a developer in that specific channel. But I think it's all downstream of getting more quality content on the network. You'll notice that I'm spending a lot of time trying to do that because I actually kind of want to get in the mindset of like how do things perform on the network? What kind of things get engagement? I mean, obviously I have enough distribution to kind of actually test that, but everything is downstream of increasing quality content on the network. Everything else is just moving Lego pieces.
Cool. There's two more questions. Let me try to get through them quickly before the end of the meeting. One is any plans to ban GPT bots on Warpcast? So one of the things we're exploring this week is there an easy way to detect accounts that are clearly just posting like GPT content, which I think everyone would just be happy if those accounts were not showing up in replies. So we're going to try to do something there. It is actually harder than it looks on the surface, because if you go into some of these accounts and click in, a decent chunk of them are not just posting GPT replies. There's actually a human there that's posting human replies to a bunch of content, and then GPT replies to some other content and here and there. And so in a lot of cases, it is not a true bot account. Like this is not someone that is programmatically like pulling from ChatGPT and pasting here. It's a human trying to interact, maybe doesn't speak the language and is trying to copy paste things and post like generic responses, which are annoying to everybody reading the thread. So we're trying to be smart about like how we identify and hide some of these accounts, because I think if we're too aggressive, we get into the like everybody complains about shadow banning, and there's a whole set of people that are real users that are upset that this happens and they want to talk to their friends. And if we're not aggressive enough about this, then there's just a bunch of stuff on cast that isn't that interesting. So TLDR, we're working on it. The recent uptick in GPT content might make it easier to identify and batch some of these together. And we might have something shipping as early as next week.
In addition, going back to the kind of like, okay, so priority mode basically solves this for most people, but then there's a bunch of people who don't like priority mode because they're missing the like 1 out of every 50 posts that is quality. So it's a reasonable like complaint. It's like people were there to discover new people. We're probably going to add the version on at least cast pages where it just says show more. So the idea is like, I know Jason had suggested this originally. We were kind of against it because it's like, you say you don't want to see this stuff, but then you want to be able to click through it. We're just going to add this because we'd rather have people keep priority mode on, but give them the control that they can go check those cast pages. But it's still an unsolved problem, right? So people complained about spam. We added priority mode. Then people complain that they don't see everything. So they turn priority mode off and then they start complaining about spam. So we have to get to a solution. We're going to tackle it from Varun's angle. We're going to tackle it from the UI angle. But it will only get worse on the protocol as the AIs get more and more sophisticated. You could see like a year or two from now, the AIs won't look like just GPT. They'll be able to train on the smartest people on crypto Twitter, and then you actually have no idea that you're talking to like just a random person who's using an AI. So it is an ongoing problem that we will continue to have to solve. And I think we're just going to take it iteratively.
Cool. And I think the other questions have been answered on chat. So if there's nothing else, we will probably wrap after this. Last call for questions. Going once. Going twice. Sinever, you had a question?
Yeah, guys, I have a question regarding the storage. Just want to understand why there's no separation, like specific action in the Farcaster takes specific amount of storage. And if you buy a unit, you have like 5,000 followers, this amount of cast and so on. Why there's no like basically like a unit of each type of action in the Farcaster will take specific amount of storage, and then some user can maybe like more but less comment and so on.
So yeah, it's a good question. The question is like, can we just turn storage into generic? So rather than buying like certain number of cast, likes, and follows, can you just buy 1 megabyte of space and then store whatever you want in that 1 megabyte? The question, and this is the part where it gets complicated. What happens when you run out of space? Like what do you do to the user's account when they run out of that last unit of storage? Do you stop and prevent them from casting anything until they delete some content? Or do you let them cast and then delete their oldest content? Because then you have to explain to them, oh, you posted a new cast, we now deleted a follow, which is a very like confusing user experience. And so that's really what it comes down to, is like, how do you actually make this explainable and usable to end users in a way that makes sense? And any version where we are just giving you bytes and asking you to reason about what you're storing there is just very complicated from a user POV, and there's no easy way to do it. There might be a mode, and there probably are some interesting solutions here to explore, where you in the future might be able to opt into something like this. And so if you're a developer that's using your account largely to store likes for channel moderation or something like that, maybe there's a version where you can switch it into this mode and then change some of those allocations or something like that. But I think a world where it's like purely byte-based is just hard for end users to understand why taking some action here changes something over there. And that's the reason we haven't shipped that yet.
I see, thanks. Is there any way like you can, let's say if you're out of, like you're still good with likes, follows, but let's say you're out of comments, right? Can you just buy additional comments instead? Because buying a unit is like because some users like they're like they have a lot of space for all the likes, follows, but then the issue is only comments, right? Is there any way to have more granular control of what you buy?
So I think we can do this. The reality is, I think this solves the use case for 0.0001% of people who are like, hey, I want all my likes preserved on the network. And the actuality is, from a day-to-day user experience, most people can still continue posting and using. And the mental model for like how we think about hubs is, hubs are less like your hard drives and more like RAM. They're really just meant to store the last slice of data that is useful for you. And if your goal is, I want to preserve everything for all history so I can read it, clients can actually start offering archive features where they say, hey, we will just store all of your pruned likes and your pruned content so you can go back and look at it. But the reality is that content is not that interesting for 99.999% of the people in the rest of the network. It's never going to show up in a feed. It's never going to be used for anything interesting. Excuse me. And so we don't want to spend a lot of time building like very complex storage mechanisms that will let some small subset of users buy like an extra 500 likes, and rather focus on the broader problem of how do we keep the network as simple as possible and let it scale so that we can just get more and more users onto the platform. So I think that the best solution to that I would propose is, if someone wants more likes, you can buy more storage units. They're relatively cheap, $3 a year. You can buy 10, 20, 30, 40. If you have, like, for some reason, 300,000 likes that you are trying to preserve, and you're like, hey, paying $60 a month is expensive, we would actually encourage you to archive it. That data is not useful to the rest of the network. It's not valuable to hubs, it's not valuable to other developers, and we don't want every hub on the network storing a copy of your 300,000 likes. That's actually just too expensive, and you should probably store it offline in the system. So that's the mental model. It's like, it's RAM, it stores the most recent slice of your content, and it's not your permanent storage, which is a very different model from how other social networks work. But it's how we've developed this chunk of Farcaster. Okay, I know we're over
Thanks for
time
explanation.
here, so we might have to stop, but if anyone has any questions, you're always welcome to cast at us and we can continue in the threads. All right, thanks everyone.